Once Upon a Time is a crazy TV show that I watched for the same reason I watched Lost. You see, the whole thing is told out of order, with a massive number of questions and roughly 3 plot twists an episode. I held off on watching it until its 3rd season, because it was of course advertised as a fairy tale romance, which it also is, but half of it takes place in the real world and, as you can guess, was created by the writers of Lost. Now, I've seen most of the spiritual successors to Lost, but I must say, when it comes to the more insane writing style, Once Upon a Time not only nails it, but cranks it up to 11. With that said, I've made many theories on this show in the past. It aired from 2011 to 2018, and throughout that time I made numerous predictions, some of which could still theoretically be true, as well as mapping and remapping the entirety of its insane, multiversal family tree, and also building on the lore now that it's over. Today's going to be more of that, and I'm about to answer some of the show's most long-standing questions with an absolutely wild, unifying theory I've been formulating for years at this point. Hello, I'm the Theorizer, and sorry if it sounds different in this video. I'm recording on the go. But here are just some of the questions I'll be trying to answer with this wild theory. If you can find the connection, then bravo. You'll have already done what I just spent 3 years trying to accomplish. What is the fiery room people see during the sleeping curse? What the heck is up with those books and the unholy grail that are in the random library in New York? What is Maleficent's whole backstory before she met Regina? What's the rest of the Apprentice's backstory? I could tack on dozens of other questions that will be answered under this, but those are just a few. So let's begin. Back in 2016, I made a theory on who Lily's father was. I determined that it was most likely the dragon. Because not only was he the only other dragon in the series, but he literally mentions that he had a daughter that he lost. This is never brought up again. More recently, it also dawned on me that he literally uses water lilies as his magical sustenance. But it could all be a coincidence. You see, during the last 5 minutes of the entire show, out of literally nowhere, they randomly say, in the middle of an unrelated conversation, Zorro is Lily's father. This is a character we have never met or even heard of in the entirety of this series, and then they just blurt it out as a literal inside joke against those who've been theorizing about it. Now, it could have been last minute, or it could have been loosely planned because the actress who played younger Lily is Spanish, which is entirely consistent with Zorro being Spanish as well. This is all a mess, but it does show that the creators put some level of thought into these things, despite their insistence on subversions at inopportune moments. I also had questioned if the Apprentice was Lily's father, though, and here's why. Not only is he connected to the dragon through August, but the Apprentice lived nearby Maleficent's cave and then was forced by the author to darken Lily's egg because it, quote, made for a better story, implying it was poetic for the Apprentice in particular to do this. On top of that, he seemed more vested in Lily than just feeling bad. He seemed almost fatherly, and she called him Yoda. He spoke about the egg as if it were a child that was important to him. He taught her everything after becoming her mentor in the land without magic. That's a lot of proof, and the Apprentice, being from Camelot, could very well possibly be a Pendragon. But I digress. There is a connection here, although I'm more inclined at this point to say he was none other than Maleficent's father. You see, we never truly get Maleficent's backstory. There's a lot of fragments here and there, and characters casually say she's immortal, but she was clearly born at some point because Regina says in the 2nd episode of the show that Maleficent was her age when Briar Rose defeated her. Take this, however, with a grain of salt, because this episode, as with all earlier episodes, are filled with plot holes, what with Maleficent seemingly not knowing who gave Regina the curse despite literally being the one to steal it for Rumpelstiltskin. There are ways of navigating the logic, of course, but in general, there's illogic here. Maleficent is also implied to have created sleeping curses, which date back so far as to when Hook was a child and his father was preserved under one. Timeline-wise, Rumpelstiltskin is 190 years old just before the first curse is cast. This is calculated using known gaps in time between when his son goes missing, when he kills Mila, when he takes power from the seer, and then when he gets his castle and first meets Jiminy Cricket. This flashback is also the first time in the show we see his castle, and he sits in a library instead of his main room. This difference from the usual is indicative of early happenings. There isn't too much happening in here. He's done it a couple other times too, but in terms of the show's chronology and episodes, the overall implication is that this is shortly after he acquired the castle. On top of this, I think I just discovered a plot hole, because doesn't Belle catch Lumiere in a lie in season 3 when she says the library was built for her? Yes, he says it was there for a couple hundred years, and she says impossible, the library was built 30 years ago for her. This is evidently not true, but again with these plot holes it can be worked around by the fact that Belle was truly optimistic about Rumple and that she'd never seen the library before, so it makes sense she'd assume that. Even then the Kendall was lying, and so, point is, Rumpelstiltskin is around 190 years old when Regina casts the Dark Curse. The creators confirmed it, and that means Hook is around that as well. If Hook is 190, it means his father is around 220, and he was cursed at age 40 or so after shortly abandoning Hook and his brother. Ergo, what this all means is that Maleficent, alleged creator of the Sleeping Curse, is at least 200 years old as well. Rumple also says that Maleficent spent ages honing her power to become a dragon, which implies she's far, far older than Regina, not just a little bit. Everyone calls her immortal, and with all that in mind, Maleficent exceeds Rumpelstiltskin in age. This is important because we also know how old the Apprentice is. He's 500 years old at the time of the curse. This means he could easily be her father, and by extension, that what I'm about to say could easily be true. Yes, this is where things get good. This is the connection I discovered recently that made me obsessed with getting this video out. The creators reuse props and models, and it's all fine and dandy, but I'd already seen these smaller connections, and all I needed was one big physical consistency to get this right. And there is one, in the form of a very specific reused room. The fiery room of the Sleeping Curse, the New York Public Library, and Rumpelstiltskin's castle all share identical archways and layouts. It's literally the same, and the wiki agrees with me. This blew my mind because it was my theory proven. You see, the Apprentice lived in his cottage for some time, but that's no place to have a family. He lived there since at least the time of Zoso, who was the Dark One for roughly less than a decade, I'd assume, given how much he hated it, and after failing to cleave himself from the dagger, it was probably taken, so shortly after. And if the Apprentice does have a grandfatherly relationship to Lily, as is heavily implied, then he'd need a place to raise Maleficent, and this is where the castle comes in. I know Rumple must have acquired this castle instead of building it because it's all run down and has dead trees out front. Why would he plant trees just to leave them unwatered? Exactly, he took it. Question is why? Well, it's a stronghold of magic. We know for a fact that Merlin and the Apprentice have dozens of massive structures scattered about, one being the mansion, so why is it remotely unrealistic to assume that the Apprentice lived here and had a family? His daughter Maleficent grows up, and something terrible and horrific happens, leading to the creation of the Sleeping Curse, which just so happens to be a room on fire, as you'd expect from a dragon. Which room, you ask? Why, the same exact room is the center of their very own castle. I don't know what happened here, but I think this room being adjacent to the main mirror room is kind of a byproduct glitch of the curse, as it can only be returned to accidentally post-awakening or by smashing the ground with magical guidance. This is a terrifying depiction of what happened between Maleficent and the Apprentice, and it now makes perfect sense why the castle looks burnt and abandoned. This brings me to the third location, which proves the Apprentice link must exist, and it's the New York Library. In the Season 5 finale, they set up this huge question and then never resolve it. How is there all this stuff in the land without magic? The answer is extremely simple. The Apprentice. Here we see several Once Upon a Time books in the Dark Grail, both of which notoriously originate from Merlin. The Apprentice already has a New York alter ego when he meets Lily on the bus, or when he teleports Ingrid there, or when he literally creates a publishing company to track down authors. This is his doing, and Neil was also trying to use this room for answers, which makes sense given his connection to August, and therefore both the dragon and, yes, Apprentice. This room is maintained by the Apprentice, this archive of everything magical in case of certain doom, and it shares the same exact layout as his castle. Maleficent, the authors, and the Apprentice are all key players in the 4th season, in the 4th season alone. I believe they planned all of this out but never fulfilled it because of how similar the episode would be to something out of Game of Thrones, ergo they replaced it with that Korra episode. Rumple starts his quest for magic where? The library, which is exactly where the Apprentice places his artifacts. Unfortunately, he got the wrong library. The Apprentice is of course Mickey Mouse, which is why Rumple transforms him as such, and thus I do believe this character would technically be referred to as Michael Pendragon. This all means that Maleficent created a literal netherworld with her curse, and that's pretty impressive. Don't believe me on all this? Well, here's a question. Where was Morgan Le Fay during the entirety of the Camelot arc? Maleficent is not a name, it's a word. Split it up, and you get a name strangely close to what we're looking for, and on top of that, both of these characters have striking similarities, and both have ties to fairies. Finally, do you remember when Rumpelstiltskin ambushed Lancelot and Guinevere in his vault and robbed them of their gauntlet? Well, guess what happened not hours later, when Maleficent, of all people, somehow knew it was stolen and then kidnapped Belle to receive it in return. I rest my case. Now all I need to know is who her mother is. Give me a few months, I have a whole other side to this theory that bridges into the origin of magic and the fairies and how I believe Maleficent drank from the Dark Grail. Until then, stay tuned, subscribe, share. I'm the Theorizer.